Thanks for stopping by the channel again. Today I'm going to do a somewhat deep dive into 1 Peter 2, where Peter writes about submission to authorities. And in this deep dive, I'm going to be talking about what submission to authority looks like, what God uses to define proper authority, and what that looks like for Christians in particular, but even the general culturally Christian and even non-Christian person in the United States today. And we're gonna do an emphasis on good versus evil, because that's what Peter talks about. So why don't we take a look at that? In 1 Peter 2, starting in verse 13, we read, "Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority, or to the governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. For such is the will of God, that by doing right you silence the ignorance of foolish people. Act as free people, and do not use your freedom as a covering for evil, but use it as bondservants of God. Honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, and honor the king." All right. So, as always, we need to break this down. And as the last time when I talked a little bit about Romans 13, 1 through 7, I'm going to start backwards here. It says here, honor all people, love the brotherhood. Okay, so God is telling us we need to honor all people. That's pretty simple to understand, not always easy to manifest, if you would. But that's the core and the crux of what good is. In this sense, honoring all people is to recognize in them that they are imago Dei. They are made in the image of God. They, not in a physical sense, but in the reality of who we are in the core of our intellect and our reasoning and in our emotional beings. We are made in the image of God in that spiritual sense. And because of that, everybody has inherent dignity. Everyone. It's one of the reasons why I'm so adamantly opposed to the murder of preborn children. Why I'm so adamantly opposed to infanticide in the womb. It's because, as the scriptures tell us, we're fearfully and wonderfully made, and that God knit us together in our mother's wombs. How can we then, as human beings, support the ripping apart of babies limb from limb in the womb? We can't. We aren't allowed to do that. And it doesn't matter if you agree with me or not. My definition is objective. It comes from a source outside of myself, and it's unchanging. And therefore, I honor people. Now, does honoring all people, does that look like soft, mealy mouth, milk toast, penny waste approaches to every single issue that you're going to run into with all people? Well, no, of course not. Sometimes people are doing evil, they're doing wrong, and they need to be told so. And sometimes that's going to come off as very harsh. And even when it's loving, it can come off as very harsh. And that's a necessity. Now, notice the emphasis on love the brotherhood. That is a very specific thing. That's referring to Christians. And there's a distinction. Honor all people, love the brotherhood. Now, I'm going to treat every human being as if they have the inherent dignity of being made imago Dei. But I'm going to love my fellow Christians in a different way. And I'm going to lovingly approach them about our differences. fail at it a lot. But that's the summing up of what Peter is telling us about honoring authority. All right. This is what it looks like. When you honor authority, you honor all people, you love the brotherhood, and you fear God. Now, is this that quaking and trembling before God because you're afraid he's going to strike you dead for some mistake that you made? Is it being afraid that he's going to take your life because you sin? No, it's a reverence. It's a deep and abiding reverence. It's an awe. It's an awe, right? And we're not to give that kind of reverence to anybody else. When we do, we're committing idolatry, which is evil. All this is very important, right? And then look, how does Peter finish that off when it comes to authority and honor the king? Because you fear God, you honor the king. Now, Peter is referring to earthly authority, right? That's what he's referring to here. And we know that because in verse 13, he starts off with, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority or to the governors as sent by God, by him, God, for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. So we honor the king, the human institution, every human institution. Aha. So what does that mean for Christians in the constitutional republic of the United States? Do we have a king? We don't. Is the president a king? Nope. Okay, well, he does talk about governors. Governors in this reference is referring to specifically governors as appointed by Caesar, by Rome, by the emperor, right? That's a fact. It's unavoidable. Rome appointed governors over Palestine and Israel and over certain sections and segments of Africa and East Asia and West Asia and up into Europe, Western and Northern Europe, all the way up to the British Isles. They did that. They conquered and they appointed governors. Some of those governors were straight from Rome. Others were raised up through the ranks of the Roman military, and they were representatives of the king. This is very, very, very important for us to grasp here in the United States. We're a constitutional republic. We don't have a king. Governors are not appointed by a king in the United States. Governors are, yes, put in place by God, but God has ordained a particular system in the United States for how these governors and the president come into place. That's through elections. Our elections are very much regulated by the Constitution, right? So what's our human institution that we're supposed to be submitting ourselves to here in the United States? The Constitution, right? And the president isn't a king under the Constitution. He's a servant. Guess what? Governors are servants, right? So here we go. When we read this passage of scripture as Christians, we start off first with a fundamental understanding that the Constitution is our highest earthly authority. And you guys have heard me say this ad nauseum, hundreds of, not thousands of times since I launched this channel, the tens and tens of you that watch. But here, we start off here, okay? Let's just close this for a second. We start off here with the Constitution, here, and then we, the people, come in under that. And then down here are those that are elected to serve. And then underneath them are all of the unelected but appointed bureaucratic types, right? So this is so important, okay? We're in charge. We're in charge. Christian and non-Christian alike. In the United States, in our constitutional republic, in the Republic of the United States. It's Constitution, we the people, then the elected servants, and then way down here, off camera, are the appointed bureaucratic servants. Okay, so how do we hold them accountable? What do we do? Well, let's come back to this now. So I'll read this right here from verse 14. Or to the governors is sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. For such is the will of God, that by doing right you silence the ignorance of foolish people. Act as free people. Do not use your freedom as a covering for evil, but use it as bondservants of God. That word is actually slaves. It comes from the Greek word doulos. That literally means slaves. You are in bondage to God. As a Christian, especially, you are in bondage to God. You are slaves to God. We're told in other places that you're either a slave to your sin or you're a slave to Christ, a slave to God. Okay? So, one more time. As sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. Now, when you have elected servants and appointed servants who are supposed to be serving we the people here in the constitutional republic of the United States that are not punishing evildoers and not praising those who do right, there's a couple of things happening. One on a philosophical constitutional level and one on a biblical level. Okay. I want to be angry that people don't see this. I want to be angry at the church, especially because we don't talk about this enough. Okay. When we have elected servants violating the Constitution, especially those people who take the oath of office, and they're rewarding evildoers and punishing those who do good, not only are they violating the Constitution, therefore making themselves oath breakers, but they're also, because they take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. And so when droves of people are standing up and saying, you don't have the authority, and once again, keep in mind, this is a commentary channel. It's not a policy channel. It's a commentary channel based on my understanding, very sound understanding. And most of the people who are going to argue with me are going to, especially people who know me locally, who are going to argue against me, don't know the Constitution well enough to argue against me. Period. Many of those people are people who have taken oaths of office in different capacities, in the military, in the legal system and the justice system, and others. They just don't know the Constitution well enough. They take an oath to defend the Constitution from enemies, both foreign and domestic, and then they spend a lot of time making themselves domestic enemies of the Constitution, therefore making them enemies of we the people. And then they turn around and they reward evildoers. So I've become aware of a case in New Mexico where a man who works within law enforcement is in a very, very, very precarious position right now, because he has taken a stand on the Constitution, and his employers are actively persecuting him to silence him. They've relegated him to a, for lack of better terminology, a janitorial closet, and they're seeking to eliminate him from his job. And they're using everything under the sun to come at him, job performance wise. They don't have anything to stand on. So they took a situation and they misrepresented what happened and are using that to try and drum him out. They're defending a criminal who assaulted him. And they're using his response to the struggle as a means to drum him out of public service because they don't like his positions. Now, that's rewarding evil. Not to mention the fact that they should be defending him for being a constitutional officer, right? That's what they should be doing. Not only should they be defending him, they should be rewarding him, praising him for being an upstanding, constitutionally minded officer. Here's this officer in New Mexico, and he's the testimony of the people that have passed the story on to me is that this guy's not done anything wrong. He's just not done anything wrong. Just criminal didn't like the fact that when he resisted arrest, it got physical, and he ended up getting an injury, not even close to life-threatening, and he filed a complaint, and they're using that to try and drum him out. And that's a perfect example of what we see right here in 1 Peter. As sent by God for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. They should be punishing the evildoer. Instead, they decided they're going to punish the one who's doing right. And there are places in the scriptures that say, woe to you who call good evil and evil good. And that's where we're at. They're literally labeling this officer doing his job and standing for the oath that he takes as evil. And why? Because elected servants and appointed bureaucratic servants have forgotten who's in charge. They've forgotten. So let's move on. All right. So we can define, on a philosophical, constitutional level, we can define evil as anything that's a violation of the Constitution. And any person who takes that oath, like I did when I was in the military, I've never given up that oath. And we can, anything that violates the Constitution is evil. But we also have an objective source for defining evil, and that's our God. We see over and over in the scriptures. And this is an article from Got Questions, and they do a pretty good job most of the time. There's some things I disagree with them on, but overall, they do a really good job. And look at all of this content just about how we define good versus evil, right? So here's the thing, Christian or not, you don't get to make up your own definition of what's good and what's evil. And so we have this bearing on us. And when I mean bearing, it's like it's coming in on us. As Americans, we have the constitutional definition of what is good and what is evil. And the Constitution defines all of our liberties as good and any violation of our liberties as evil, right? Okay. But we also have the objective source of what is good and evil, coming to play. Okay? And that objective source is God's definition of what is good and what is evil. And God defines evil as anything that violates his standards. Well, how do we know what his standards are? Well, let's take a look at the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. You shall have no other gods before you. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's property. So all of those things define what is evil. And as I've said in other places, every law that's constitutional, first, cannot violate the Constitution. Marbury versus Madison. Any law that is repugnant to the Constitution is no law, right? Starts there, just constitutionally. But furthermore, every law that's in place in the United States has at its root originally the 10 Commandments, which is why there have been so many courthouses and other places that had the 10 Commandments or replicas of the 10 Commandments through, paintings and pictures and statuary and whatnot of the 10 Commandments. Remember, Judge Roy Moore fought a really hard battle to keep the 10 Commandments in place in his jurisdiction. Why? Because they're a reminder of what God defines as good and how he defines and delineates what is evil. So let's take now, am I advocating that if you find out your neighbor is coveting your wife, you should be able to have him arrested? No. Because the 10 Commandments are God's eternal moral law. They predate the existence of man. Even though we didn't have them in a tangible sense, God's laws predate our existence because they're definitions of his character. But we know it's wrong to murder because God says murder is wrong. Now, there are times where killing is justified, and God even institutes the death penalty for a lot of things that we don't use the death penalty for today. But God has defined good by keeping his laws. And that's how our laws are based. Our laws are based on thou shalt not murder. Well, why? Why? If there's no objective source for right and wrong, good and evil, then we don't know that murder is wrong. Now, people will go, well, that's just a weak Christian mindset that says that. The problem is that the world system, when left to an amorphous, subjective definition of right and wrong, good and evil, will always land on the side of tyranny. Always land on the side of tyranny. Therefore, the Nazis of the Third Reich completely justified murdering millions upon millions of people for no other reason than they didn't like them. That's it. The Marxist-Leninists, the Marxists of the world have committed far more atrocities in the name of their godless religion of communism, of Marxism. Billions of people have died because of communism, which adamantly rejects all religion, but especially Christianity, because Christianity stands starkly opposed to Marxism. And it's led to the slaughter of not just a few million, but billions of people, either through starvation unintentionally or eradication of dissidents and so on. It's just, you have to have an objective source to be able to point to, because if you don't, then whoever gets into a position of power in your nation gets to determine right from wrong, good from evil. That brings us to where we are today. We're watching people shift away from traditional Judeo-Christian definitions of right and wrong, good and evil, in their calling what was once evil good, and calling what is now good or was once good, calling it evil, and punishing those who do good and rewarding those who do evil. Look at the nepotism and the sycophants with an elected office. They fall all over each other to praise each other and protect one another. Period. They do. And that goes across party lines most of the time. There aren't a lot of really strong conservative Republicans anymore. There was a day where there were very strong conservative Democrats, and they're being forced out of their party. Conservative Republicans are being forced out of their party. People who stand for the Constitution are being forced out of public light. Just look at the way they're addressing things. And boy, if you call them out for being fascists and Marxists when they do those things, and make no mistake, Antifa, groups like that would say that they're not fascist because their name says they're not fascist, but they want to bring an authoritarian dictate on what you can and cannot do, and they'll use everything under the sun at their disposal to silence anyone who disagrees with them, to silence the dissenters. And they'll call them all sorts of names, and they'll harass their employers, and they'll harass them at home, and they do all of these things in a dictatorial way by labeling good evil and evil good as a violation of God's commands. And so how does all this tie in together for the ruling authorities? So ruling authorities, and I've said this before, like any man-made institution that runs afoul of the highest ruling authority, the highest law of the land in the United States, the Constitution, and then we the people, as following the Constitution. It's not a vote of the mob mentality of, well, we don't want to follow the Constitution anymore, so we don't have to. We're just going to call the Constitution null and void. No, if you violate the Constitution, if you threaten the Constitution, you're an enemy of the Constitution. If you don't protect the Constitution, you're an enemy of the Constitution. If you don't call those who do protect and defend and stand on the Constitution, if you don't protect them, or you attack them for doing that and say that they're dangerous or they're a discredit to society, you're violating the Constitution, and therefore you're an enemy of the Constitution. But furthermore, if you align yourself against God and you support things that are violations of God's law, and I love my atheist friends, Tomsky, I love you. You and I still need to have a debate about this. I think it'll be fun. You'll probably destroy me because you're clearly smarter than I am. But I love my atheist friends because you guys, most of you, are intellectual enough that we can have this conversation and walk away from it friends and allies still. But there are people who should agree with me, who are actively using twisted definitions of good and evil to silence people like me. Period. This is the way it is. And that's the thing. That makes you an enemy of the Constitution. I don't care if you're a private citizen. I don't care if you're a public servant. I don't care if you're an elected servant. Whatever the case might be, if you do things that fly in stark contrast to how our Constitution operates and fly in stark contrast in rebellion against the law of God, and you do those things intentionally, and then you say you're doing good, you're doing evil. And you're compounding your evilness by calling your evil good. And those like me and others who are doing good and standing for righteousness and standing for the Constitution, and when you attack us for those things, you're dangerous. You're a problem. And now there are people out there who have the power because of their position to destroy dissent. Doesn't make it right, though. Power doesn't make you right. Power makes you powerful. And more often than not, as the old saying goes, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Power corrupts. Once people get in a position of power, say for a few ideologues who genuinely hold to their convictions when they get into positions of power, most people get that power and they don't want to let it go because they don't understand the power that they have isn't theirs. It comes to them from the people and the Constitution and ultimately from God. And so they think that everybody exists to serve them and do as they say. I don't care if it's, as I said the other day, you're a local dog catcher. I'm taking your dog. I know we don't have dog catchers anymore. I said that too. But, or if it's your mayor, or if it's somebody in the city council, county board, county administrators, anybody, sheriffs, governors, all of you, you're God's, you're put in place by God according to how he has dictated those things happen here in the United States. And that means you're a servant first to the Constitution and then to we the people. And all of you, no matter what your position is, you're servants. You're servants. And when you violate the terms of your service, you're doing evil. And you shouldn't be praised for it. You should be punished for it. And when you're not punishing those who do evil, and instead you punish those who do good, you're doing evil, and you should be punished for it. And that's where the dichotomy is today, here in the United States. Elected servants and appointed servants actively do evil, constantly, and actively attack those who do good, constantly. Look at the municipalities that have shut down abortion care ministries who reach out to try and prevent abortions from happening, not in a violent way, but just try to talk people out of it. And they literally have brought like disturbing the peace laws in play against abortion mill counselors, sidewalk counselors. Had people arrested for using offensive language, calling abortion murder and saying, please don't murder your child. Like, people have been arrested for that. Just under the COOF regulations in a couple of states, there were people who were arrested for not having masks on outside and not social distancing enough and not following the stay-at-home orders when they were actively trying to minister to women going in to murder their children. That's where we're at. And so if you're an elected servant and you aren't doing everything in your power to be the servant that you're supposed to be according to the Constitution and according to the Word of God, whether you're a Christian or not, if you're not rewarding those who do good as God defines good and punishing those who do evil as God defines evil, and in the case of constitutional issues, as the Constitution defines right and wrong or good and evil, if you're not doing those things, you should resign. You should resign. You should be replaced. And if you don't do that willingly, you should be forced out through recall. And if it gets bad enough, you should be arrested. That's the way it is. Mario Cuomo, Gavin Newsom, Eric Garcetti, the entire city council of Minneapolis, the entire St. Paul City Council. Now, this is my opinion, of course. And even if you disagree with me, I'm not wrong. And I'm not your enemy for disagreeing with you or for you disagreeing with me. But when I when I say these things, I'm saying them from a place of deep personal conviction. And when I took the oath in the military, even as a nominal Christian at that time, I didn't come to genuine saving faith until 2004. So 17 years ago. Man, it's been a long time. When I took that oath before God. And that's binding on my conscience. And it should be binding on the conscience of every single person who's ever taken that oath, no matter what position you're in. And I know some places are trying to eliminate that, so help me God, from the oath. I'll never stop dwelling on it. So help me God. So the positions I take aren't just me being a constitutionalist. And sometimes I can be crass, I know. I'm sorry. I get fired up. So the positions I take aren't just me being a constitutionalist and a patriot. The positions I take, I stand on them firmly because a long time ago when I was in the military, I swore an oath and I said, so help me God. And the God I serve is bigger than any elected office, any elected servant. Bigger than the president. He's bigger than governors. He's bigger than mayors, all of them combined. No matter how powerful that elected servant might be in the grand scheme of things, they don't trump my God. And so I stand on the Constitution because I stand on the bedrock of what the Constitution is built on. God appointed it to be the highest earthly authority in the United States. And I stand on that. Over an oath that I took a very long time ago. In 1991. So help me God. That's why I stand. For those of you out there who have taken that oath, stand on it and remember, it's a covenant between you and the people you serve, we the people, and the Constitution, and God oversees it. You might get away with violating that oath today, but you will answer to we the people and ultimately to God for punishing good and rewarding evil. Until next time, Sic Semper Tyrannis.